Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in today for another Reuters Events New Energy Update webinar. Happy to say that webinar today we've partnered with Power Factors, and we've got some really great panelists as well alongside Steve at Power Factors, who are going to have live panel discussion today with Q&A, covering adapting to the new normal for renewable asset managers. So as normal, get your questions in throughout, and we'll have some time dedicated at the end for Q&A with the attendees. So you just use the question function on the right, and we'll pass them over to Steve to distribute across all of the different panelists. And there's also a handout on the right, so if you want some more info about the speakers, and it's not on screen at the time, just download the handout. It's just a Word document with some info about the speakers. So that's on your right hand side as well. So yeah, I don't want to take up too much time. We've got 60 minutes today and quick format. So Steve's going to do an introduction, introduce the panelists, and we'll have a quick 10-minute presentation followed by the live discussion and closing with audience questions. So yeah, it's a pleasure to have Steve join us. So Steve Hanawalt from Power Factors. So I can hand over now to Steve to introduce himself and the panelists too.
Yeah, thank you, Reese. Thank you, Reuters Events. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to Power Factors sponsored webinar entitled Now What? Adapting to the New Normal for Renewable Energy Asset Managers. This is Steve Hanawalt. I'm Executive Vice President and co-founder of Power Factors. Power Factors provides the world's leading technical asset management software services to renewable power owners and operators. We have a great set of panelists today. We are really excited about what they're going to bring today to us. Obviously, we're in the midst of a very serious worldwide pandemic. And how do we adapt our renewable energy organizations to successfully navigate in this new normal? So we, again, have 4 excellent panelists. I'll introduce them in just 1 minute. But before I do, I'd like to kind of set the context here. So to put it mildly, the COVID-19 pandemic has had dramatic impact, of course, on our lives, everything from how we shop for groceries to where we work. The coronavirus will forever change how we work and how we go about our daily lives. To help us succeed in this new environment, we've invited 4 panelists, energy industry executives with a broad set of experiences and background. We have 2 from the solar industry, 2 from the wind industry, 2 asset owners, 2 asset managers, 1 independent service provider, 1 EPC, 2 developers. So a lot of great background and experience to share with you today. I'll moderate the panel. I'll pose some questions that we think need to be answered as we move forward through this new normal. As Reese said, we'll also collect audience questions. At the end of the webinar, we'll review those with our panelists and get their insights into those questions also. Our primary goal, of course, today is to provide you with insights and best practices in how to successfully navigate renewable power operations in the midst of and coming out of a pandemic. Our secondary objective is to help you prepare for any new major disruptions that may be on the horizon, things we don't even know about today. Without further ado, though, I'd like to go ahead and get started. And the way I'm going to do that is introduce each panelist in order. So let's start off with Kevin. Kevin, please introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about your company and what you do there.
Thanks, Steve. Good morning, everybody. My name is Kevin Devlin. I'm Senior Vice President of Operations at Pattern Energy. Pattern Energy is based in the US, but operates in several countries. We're in the US, Canada, Japan, and Mexico. And our business is development of both solar, wind, and transmission in various regions. My responsibility in the company is I run the operations, and what that means is essentially construction, asset management, and field operations as well. So it's nice to be here. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Kevin. Paula, how about yourself?
Hello, everyone. My name is Paula Renedo, and I work at Opti Energy. And we are a company that develops, builds, and operates renewable assets, both solar and wind. I work at Opti Energy as the head of global O&M. And so I basically manage renewable assets that are currently under operation, with a current portfolio of over 300 megawatts within Europe and Latam. And as Kevin said, I'm really happy to be part of this panel and looking forward to discuss the different insights.
Thank you, Paula. Mark, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Good morning, Steve. Thanks for having me. Mark McClanahan here, the CEO of MaxGen Energy Services. MaxGen provides operations and maintenance services to IPPs, utilities, and OEMs that are active in the U.S. market for both solar and wind.
Excellent. Thank you, Mark. And finally, last but not least, Adela.
Hi, Steve. Good morning. Good afternoon to everybody. My name is Adele Ara. I work at License BP, where I serve as director of the asset management business. License BP, for those of you who aren't familiar with us, is a developer, owner, and operator of solar PV plants. Company was founded in 2010, so we are a reasonably young organization. And since 2018, we are in partnership with BP to accelerate what is our main goal, which is really leading the solar revolution, as we like to call it. We operate in 40 different countries. We have assets operational in the UK, the US, and India. We are building new sites as we speak in Spain, Australia, again, UK, and US. And we have further development in these jurisdictions and additionally some EMEA countries and South America.
Excellent. Thank you, Adela. And thank you, panelists. So now let's turn to our first question. And Adela, I'm going to pose this to you first. Adela, what are some of the lessons you've learned from the COVID-19 pandemic so far?
So I think there are 2 or 3 elements that have become apparent quite quickly when the pandemic exploded, particularly affecting European countries and the UK. First of all, we realized how resilient the technology we are managing is. Part of it is because of its relative simplicity, if you like, and part of it is because the generation is so embedded and in the proximity of where the demand and the consumptions are, which make it particularly strongly positioned in this type of situations. I think we also learned how easy, in a way, it is to manage this type of sites remotely. We realized that working remotely for the office-based staff was not necessarily a tremendous hurdle. It comes with its challenges. It comes with much more management commitment, but is definitely achievable and definitely allows the continuity of business. And one element that we are discovering more and more is how we are slightly shifting our cooperation with our stakeholders. And by stakeholders, I don't mean necessarily our lenders or our shareholders, but also our business partners. So it became quite obvious from the very beginning of the pandemic, given the general uncertainty that we were facing, how much a different cooperation with our, for example, service providers, O&M contractors, or software providers was fundamental. So a lot of the effort we are doing now from an asset management perspective is rethinking that particular relationship, rethinking how we can change the natural and historical client-supplier relationship we had with our O&M contractor, for example, and make it more of a partnership. Because at the end of the day, we can protect our position with force majeure clauses in our contracts, but sitting around the table with your O&M contractor and have a conversation around what is really crucial, what do we jointly really need to do to preserve operation of the sites during this time is fundamental. And in doing so, of course, making sure that the safety of our staff and the staff of our contractor is paramount throughout the process. So I guess it's this new way of cooperating that is most interesting.
Yeah, I like that. I like that cooperation word. Thank you, Adela. Mark, how about yourself?
I'd say the big one that that comes to mind is obviously safety. We found that as this pandemic unfolded and there was a lot of information coming at us, that it was very important for the executive team within the company and our safety organization to coordinate, to process the information, and then to turn it around and deliver it back into the organization. We already had that set up because of the safety culture in the company. So I think from a kind of a company resilience perspective, already having a safety culture embedded in the company was hugely important for us to be able to hit the ground running. And but then we were nimble as well. We went to daily calls, for example, because the information was changing so quickly. We were in a daily call cadence internally to be able to process and turn around information to our customers and also to our team members. And then we also had we have a lot of fluidity on documentation as well, policies, working with our teams to generate new policies, in particular getting simple things like JSAs or JHAs rewritten and put into the hands of our customers and our team members, our team leads, so that we can get synced up on what the procedures are. Because we're all, I mean, it seems like old hat now, but 90 days ago, this is all very new. So everyone was trying to figure out what is the right best practice, what's legal from an HR perspective, what kinds of questions can we ask and not ask. But we really hammered through that quickly, and then got it back into the hands of our customers and our own team members in the field, and that was hugely helpful for us to maintain continuity.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you, Mark. As we go through the webinar, I'd like to touch on this idea of the interrelationship with our customers, vendors, suppliers. So thank you for speaking to that, Mark. Paula, how about yourself?
Well, I think both Mark and Adele highlight very interesting points that are shared throughout all of our companies. I think a main takeaway we've received from COVID-19 is that in order to face the consequences of risk, you must be prepared. And I think it's been highlighted with this crisis, the importance of risk management, which is to identify, prioritize, and plan those risks. So facing risks is no longer now an option, it's an obligation. And we have to assume that we have vulnerabilities. Even it's important to recognize we have knowledge gaps. So I think from here, we've learned that we have to move fast. We must be the first movers. We have to be ready for changes that the virus imply in our operations. And you have to also mobilize a crisis responsive leadership. I think management becomes crucial here. You may have the best tools, the best software, but if you don't have the right management to pace them all together, nothing is going to function. So something that is also being said is it very important to be self-sufficient again, but we cannot overcome and beat the virus without cooperating or cooperating throughout the entire ecosystem of partners. That means suppliers, vendors, clients, as some of my colleagues have already explained. So it's very important first to have a good crisis management, a dedicated crisis management team. It's important to emphasize the effort of workforce. I think people are a company's biggest asset, and we are now seeing these remote working policies in place. For instance, in our company, they were not there before, so we had to adjust to them, and not even adjust to them, making sure they are both efficient and it's been safe to work from home and remotely do these operations. We also had to look at supply chains and see how supply chains can be changed and managed throughout the disruption we've seen. And also even look at tax regulations that are going to come as a result of this crisis, and how is that going to help us with our cash plans. So right. We are looking very, very closely to how to manage our liquidity. It's a top priority, and I think that is important and a key action for us. Also linked to that is the part that we focus to protect our growth and profitability, and that is linked to our strategy and our brand. We are aware that whatever decisions we make and take now are going to also affect our brand. So those outtakes, I think, are the main ones we've considered.
Yeah, thank you, Paula. Kevin, as I turn to you, each person has spoken to the importance of management and leadership, especially in these times. As you're answering the question about lessons learned from COVID-19 pandemic, can you also touch on the leadership factor, if you would?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think in a general sense, the whole idea of a pandemic was one of those things that you read in a force majeure clause, but you never really thought would happen. And I've seen it over the years. It's always been there, and I've never seen it used in anger. And here we are in a situation where we're actually in a pandemic, and we're kind of testing something that many of us have maybe thought about as a peripheral thing, but never really thought through. So I think, in a general sense, it's probably made us all think about, when we're thinking about generally risks that can befall a company or an organization, you do need to think out of the box a little bit and really think around the risks rather than the things that are kind of obvious or the things that have happened before, because in many ways you need to think about the things that haven't happened and what they might do to your business. Yeah. I think generally, I found our business was remarkably resilient and remarkably adaptable, and I think part of that was that we actually mobilized very quickly as an organization and set up. There was an executive level COVID meeting that I participated in every week, and then we had more tactical meetings as well, and it was everything from how we respond in the field to separation issues and then the construction sites, to more mundane things like how do we keep our employees engaged and sort of excited, and kind of what other kind of things can we do to actually maintain morale. So there was a whole raft of things, but they all come under the leadership bracket, which is you have to work a little bit harder in these situations, and you have to communicate harder, and you have to show that you're still engaged with the organization, because it's very easy in these remote situations to back away and right. not be present. But I think so far, I think that this massive experiment that we're in has actually gone pretty well.
Good. Well, excellent responses. Thank you. I'm going to let you, Kevin, and all of the panelists pull out your crystal ball for this next question. What will the world look like a year from now, and what has changed in your organization that is temporary, and what do you see persisting on as a result of the pandemic?
I think one thing that this has taught me is you never really can predict the future. I mean, who would have thought 6 months ago even that we would be in the situation when we're all locked in our houses and not able to travel, and the global airline industry has pretty much collapsed at the moment. So it's hard to predict. I think the big unknown for me is how long this thing is going to persist in society. I think if you read history on this, they have a habit of coming back and they don't go away first time. And I think there's a lot of unknowns about this virus that really I think we're still figuring out. And that means it's difficult to sort of really assess and plan going ahead. So I think you need to have at least 2 or 3 different scenarios for how maybe your business recovers from this over time. One could be that in a year's time we're fine, or there's immunology, or there's something else that's there that's kind of cured it, or there's a scenario that says that's still persisting. So I think you need to run different cases and really think about what each of those means. I think the overall lesson for me, I guess, as I said earlier, is that this is a giant experiment, global experiment in remote working, and it has worked pretty well. It's worked better than I expected, and I think part of the reason for that is that we're all in the same situation. We don't have, I was saying to somebody in our office that it's very difficult when you're working remotely and you're phoning into a meeting where there's 6 people around a table and there's some guy on a video conference, and it's very hard to participate. But what this has done has leveled the playing field, so we're all in the same situation, and we've learned a new discipline for talking in these meetings, where we put our hand up or we do whatever. But actually, I find the meetings actually quite productive. So it's been okay.
Yeah, that's a great point. How many times in our lifetime has the whole world been in the same situation? It's really remarkable. Mark, how about your crystal ball? What do you see about the future? and what's going to stick and what's going to just go away after the pandemic is over. Are you muted, Mark?
Yeah.
There you go.
I would say, to a large extent, we would love to return to some of, we would like to return to normal as quick as we can in many regards. Now, our normal is a little bit different than others. We already had an extensive work from home program and remote working program. Now, across the company, the entire company, we have over 1,000 technicians. Many of them are home-based technicians working from home already. And then our asset management team, our technical, some of our technical team are also working from home. The big thing we couldn't change was our remote operating center, 24/7 NERC SIP center. We took a lot of extensive steps right away to ensure the safety of that staff. Another part of the organization that's hard to run remotely is our training organization. So we do a lot of all the basic, in-person trainings that are hard to conduct through our training platform, our online training and learning platform. Things like OSHA 10, OSHA 30, tower safety, climbing, all of our live dead live, with inverters, live inverters that we have in our laboratory. All that, ideally, we want to conduct in person. The demand for solar and wind technicians is still extremely high, despite this pandemic, and so we're still trying to keep our training programs alive. We did have to, we obviously had to close them down for some time. GWO is starting to restart now, so we've been able to restart our GWO program, and some of our other live in-person training programs are back up and running. So those are things that we've worked around the rules that exist out there, all the recommendations from the CDC and the local counties and states to make sure we're compliant with those rules. But those are some of the things that I would say, we would work hard to see if we can restore so that we can keep momentum going and keep, building the organization and meeting customer needs. Things that'll change. I think that, back to this theme of communication, I think you're going to see much more partnership and communication, and the importance of the quality of that with your ecosystem is really, really critical. So trusting your partners, working out contracts that are realistic, but knowing that you're going to have to go beyond the contract language to work together, right? So that's another big one, because like Kevin was saying, force majeure clause, no one really knows how to use that clause right now. So the goal, though, is uptime, right? That's really, availability and uptime is the ultimate goal. So we're basically scrambling to do everything we can to maintain that as our primary objective, along with safety. Right. And so I think keeping that as the priority, and then working the details to make sure your teams are safe and can deliver that safely. You have the communication nailed down. That's how we're making changes right now within our team and our organization to make sure we can continue to hit our customer needs.
Right. Excellent. Thank you, Mark. Paula, what's your crystal ball for the next year or so look like?
Yeah, it's not easy to talk about when things have already passed and say that you would have done things different, but definitely there are things that we could have planned differently. Again, I focus on the identification of risks and risk assessment, even carry out real tests. So seeing if an event or risk occurs, what is the outcome that it will provoke? Even maybe taking actions that the so-called like fast and frugal, basically taking actions to buy time to then keep thinking about the longer term actions you would take. I think also establishing contingency plans or protocols of performance is something we could have worked further if we had known that it was going to happen. And also working into getting reliable information, which has shown to also be key. Communication with all stakeholders, even governments, authorities, communities. The situation is also changing rapidly, and we haven't even recovered. We are still in this situation that we don't know what's going to happen. Is very unstable. So continuous knowledge exchange, I think, is essential. Temporary things, I think most of what we are seeing, to be honest, is going to remain permanent. Mark has already mentioned distributed workforce, how we're going to remote sites, operate sites remotely. We are going to see much more focus on risk management, I believe. And I think we're going to see the importance of moving towards being more digital and supporting that ecosystem of partners. For sure, new commercial agreements to secure future supply. And I think not only force majeure is not valid, is that force majeure as such for future COVID-19 or for future pandemics is no longer to be applicable. So that's why we need to include different clauses in our contracts that will reflect this type of situation, specific ones.
Yeah.
I think what is going to be temporary is going to be that drop in prices and demand. The rest of the things we're seeing in the industry, I think they're going to be pretty much permanent.
Excellent. Thank you, Paula. Adela, as you are answering the question, what does the next year look like and what will stay and what will change? Can you also touch on what you think might happen from a regulatory perspective?
Okay, you keep the easy one for me. Thank you. So I guess so let's take it in turn. A couple of points on where do I think we're going to be in 1 year. I think what this pandemic is doing to a certain extent is accelerating and forcing us to accelerate some developments that we were already working on as an industry and as an organization. So Paula made the reference to digitalization. So I think the need to protect the safety of our staff will push us even further down the digitalization and robotics journey. And that need is even more compelling now than it was a few months ago. And it was already a trend that we were experiencing. In markets where solar generation was generally used to be heavily subsidized, like European markets and the UK as an example, this is accelerating for generators the path towards facing the same flexibility, demand response, balancing risk that unsubsidized electricity does face on a daily basis. So it's actually pushing us towards that journey, which we are going through anyway, we would have faced anyway, but maybe not in summer 2020. For the first time, I had to decide last weekend whether I was about to curtail part of my production or not. I never had to do that before. But now the combination of the energy mix in the UK and the lower demand, primarily driven because of COVID, put her in a situation of take that type of decision, which, to be fair, with subsidized electricity, we didn't necessarily have to take before. So it's accelerating that path. And therefore, I don't think there is going to be anything revolutionary, but I think the trend to digital robotics, flexibility in the way we remotely operate our sites is definitely going to be accelerated by the experience we're having in these few months. And I think on the short term, I would agree with, Kevin described it very nicely, I think, as an experiment. We are in the middle of an experiment, and I think that to connect that to what Paula was saying as well, it is highly likely that our way of working is not going to be the same. For us as an organization, as a DNA, we love staying together. We love multidisciplinary teams. We 6 people in a meeting room. We stay there for hours. We get our pizza in the evening, and it's all a bit loud family. But I think we are learning, thanks to a level playing field. Everyone is having a conference call from home with screaming children and dogs barking. At least we are all in the same boat for real. And so that, I think, will allow us to embrace a bit more the flexible working that we didn't expect to have before. And last but not least, on the long term, I think we need to rethink about the way we create redundancies in our organization. And it's not just, I don't have bandwidth, I need more staff, but is how could I find a sweet spot within my staff whereby people with similar skill, I can retrain and cross-train. So that if tomorrow I have a shortage, I can get somebody from another team to help out and vice versa. And this covers both the need of the organization to reposition its workforce in case of an emergency, but also culturally, the fact that people that are in different teams can actually better understand what happens in other parts of the organization. And this, I'm quite convinced it is something that we should be, as an industry, work on.
Yeah, I like that. Thank you. So I'm going to let you start.
I think what we are, this is quite linked to what I was saying before in terms of the acceleration power that this pandemic is showing us. What we are seeing, for example, in the UK, that we were expecting something like that to happen in the next 2 to 3 years, was renewable generators, wind and solar, being asked by National Grid, which is the transmission company owner, to be able to flexibly adapt the capacity so that they can better meet the requirement of the system. And we were expecting this to happen, but not immediately. Surprisingly, it did start 2 weeks ago. And therefore, what we are seeing is really that grid operator, based on the energy mix that every state is going to have, and more countries are having quite a lot of renewable attached to their systems, will necessarily ask us to be more flexible, ask us to be able to control remotely, ask us to have a quick response that is not, oh, I'm sorry, I need to deploy a service field engineer, I'm going to take 8 hours to go and respond to your requirements. All of these requirements for us to become a more mature generator, if you like, and really be comparable to other brownfieldish type of generators, I think is going to come much quicker than what we thought in the first place.
Yes, I agree with that. We used to have a saying in the solar industry, we've focused a lot on the M, but not much on the O side, but operational responsibility of renewables is going to grow as we have greater penetration into the grid, and it's part of that adaptability and flexibility that you guys are talking about. So let me start with you, Adela, on this third question. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to go a little bit deeper on the whole ecosystem, the relationship with your customers. Everyone has a customer, right? That's who pays us to do something. With your vendors, with your contractors, with your partners. So what are other executives that you know doing to prepare their organizations better coming out of COVID? And what are your customers telling you? What are your vendors? What are your suppliers telling you? This whole idea of cooperation. Let's touch on that just a bit. We're a little short on time, so let's keep this question short. But tell me about your ecosystem and how you see that changing and adapting coming out of COVID.
So I think generally the customers we sell electricity to are either utilities or big energy users. And really what they are, particularly the utilities that then trade what we are selling then physically on the market, are asking us flexibility, and are asking us capacity of predict what is going to happen to our sites more and more. Problems that until yesterday we didn't have. In a lot of European countries, we have priority of dispatch because we are renewables. We don't really worry about saying the system or what type of risks this generates for our counterparty. So this is what they are really focusing on. Can arbitrage that. And I think what then we need to do is making sure that we have the right technology in place to help us doing so. So and the same thing really goes for our suppliers. Ultimately, the more we allow shared platform of information and technology, the more we will be able to respond quickly to our customer and to allow our supplier to take decisions to mobilize their staff in a secure and safe manner. And these are really the keys. I think there is, is not different from how a wood chip biomass plant is managed. The challenge for us is that we have a lot of distributed generation. And this is where the logistic of it is becoming one much more difficult in Europe. But ultimately is how well can we predict what's going to happen to our sites and how quickly can we mobilize safely as a consequence of that. It really is open books. There is very little point in hiding things at this point in time or trying very smart negotiation strategies, because we are really all on the same boat. And I think just appreciating that my contractor and my service provider is on my same boat puts me in a very different negotiation positions. And I think we are, ultimately we need the same thing. That is what we really realize with this entire situation.
I like that. Thank you, Adela. Kevin, what's your thoughts on the ecosystem? What are you learning from others?
Yeah, interesting. I mean, I think this presents a certain amount of opportunity and a certain amount of threat. I think we've seen a lot in the press about, this period of the pandemic is kind of triggering maybe a change in our energy needs going forward and how we're going to behave. But there's also, in certain countries, also a retrenchment where, for example, because of much lower demand, there is a desire on the part of grid operators to push potentially renewables off the system. So I think there's almost a challenge being laid down partly to policymakers about whether we power through this and actually use it as an event to actually drive the overall greening of our economy, or whether we actually go backwards a little bit. And I think we're in an interesting stage now, because there's certainly in certain countries, I think some of that going on. So I see it both ways. My hope is that we can actually think about how we do a lot of things in our lives and maybe do a lot more with less would be the desire. But in the short term, there's obviously a huge shock to the economy. People need jobs, they need work, and there'll be a lot of things to balance, and obviously the small matter of who's going to pay for all this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Paula, your thoughts on what others are teaching you and what your customers and suppliers are telling you?
Well, I think everybody, as per executives, in order to be a better position for new normal, we need to take proactive steps, and some of them are shared throughout the entire industry. I think, and to touch on other ones that haven't been mentioned either by Adele or Kevin, we'll be also assessing all the processes and functions that require high manual intervention, and also which are the critical third-party dependencies that our businesses have, in order to, again, take the steps ahead and be better prepared. Therefore, also, I think it's also shared that we need to review standard operating procedures and keep monitoring basically the situation and provide regular feedbacks on how we're working. In terms of our customers, in our case, most of them are funds. What we see is that they request more frequent updates on how COVID-19 is affecting operation, as well as construction projects that are mostly affected by COVID-19. We are already seeing delays, especially in construction, not so much in operation, but we require further updates. So, of course, communication is also a factor that is being key to customers and funds. And we are even suggested to look and seek for local supply chains, as this is also seen, the disruption in supply chain is also seen as a high risk, and bringing it closer to local markets brings down the uncertainty. For this, and again, touching on the digital side, data analytics and digital tools become crucial at this moment to provide that feedback, that information, that monitoring, or how our projects are doing. So the investment in technology to make and to have robust IT systems, also to start planning and seeing how we're going to tackle again things like cyber attacks that we may have, with our IT system being really dependent on doing operations remotely. We are planning ahead because we are managing home working as we never had to do before, and it's going to be for an extended time. We don't even know when we are going to get back to the office.
Right.
So, and again, support that ecosystem of partners and share experiences. Adele has also mentioned it. I think this has a network effect. We are going to have more valuable business as more people join in and share information and best practices and protocols.
Yeah. Thank you, Paula. Mark, your thoughts on this question?
To a certain extent, I think there's also a flight to quality and a flight to size, where the risk of having a partner that can't perform is pretty severe. And I think we've already been focused on cost for many years and trying to drive down the cost of construction, the cost of service, levelized cost of energy ultimately. But I think this has taught us there's a trade-off there. You definitely want to make sure you have partners that can perform. And from what we're hearing from our customers, and also when we look at some of our vendors and suppliers as well, it's the same discussion. So that's a really important one. Transparency. This has been talked about a little bit, but how do you get transparency? Well, one of the ways that we do it is we make sure our work order system, also used to be called the CMMS, but our system is pretty transparent, and we're very collaborative with our customers in terms of sharing information, the analytics, the cause and effect, like making sure all that is really put out there to review in a very open manner. It's part of the digitalization comment that was made, I think, which is a really good one. But it's that sharing of information, right? And this was already happening because of for cost reasons, I think. But now, as you form up closer relationships with the partners that you have and the vendors and suppliers, integration, we're seeing more calls for integration as well. System integration, I'm talking about, which is that's changing as well, which is great. I think that definitely helps. Paula, you mentioned something about being local, and that's really important, I think. And when I think about local, I think about, can I get people to a site, right? That's actually been a real question for all of us, is how do we get people to the site, right? So having, for us, having a national network of people that are already in market, that's certainly been helpful. But you still have driving and airplanes, and we ran into some really interesting situations where you get on site and people are asking you, well, what airport did you fly through, or what states did you drive through, right? So ultimately, being reliable, I think, is really critical, and so there's definitely, I think, that flight to quality and size and reliability is a big one. And one thing this experiment had shown us is there is an increased cybersecurity risk that's already was starting to hit the energy industry last year, I would say, and it's been accelerated this year, not just in our industry, but in others as well. And that gets to the digitization. So as we bring more of our operations online, they're more exposed. So I think from as we change our plans, as I change my plans and our roadmap for our company and the services we provide, cybersecurity is definitely becoming a bigger part of what we do. And the operations team takes on a different complexion as a result of that, right, with different skill sets. And along with that is the analytics that we run on the data that we have on both the performance data and the work order data, trying to reach conclusions through desktop analysis rather than field analysis. Not only is that more cost effective in the field, but it keeps our guys safer, right? Because they're spending less time together, trying to work through trial and error, and we show up and we know what to do, and that ultimately saves money, time, and is more safe. So those are a couple of comments from my side.
Yeah, thank you. So we're going to have audience questions coming up in just a minute. So audience, if you have not submitted your questions, please go ahead and do that, and then we'll take those. I have one more quick question before that. So I'm going to ask the panelists to be really brief here, just about 30 seconds if you could, so we can leave plenty of time for audience questions. So one last question before we go to the audience, and I'll start with Paula. What has or should change in the role of asset manager or operations manager in light of the COVID-19 pandemic? And if you could keep your response pretty brief. Go ahead, Paula.
Yeah, I'll try to be really brief. I think we've already touched a very important thing, which is the sharing of information. And I think, especially with the future of asset management, is going to be in the line of sharing experiences and data. I think both in PV and in wind, we generate a lot of data, and it makes more sense to be able to compare us against others, just not ourselves. So again, it's that network effect that I was talking about before. The more we compare against others and we share that data, I think we will gain more in our industry, and we will create our safety margins to getting ahead of the future. Because nowadays we have projects that the profitability suffers a lot when the project is not well studied. The more information we have, the better study we can have about a project, and the better the IRR of the project will be in the end. As per operation, I think again data gathering and data analysis is going to be key. So data sharing and applying machine learning, even artificial intelligence, once we perform that data sharing, is going to become a differential factor. And I think operations and work should start proactively provide learnings to the industry in regards, for instance, to risk analysis and reliability center maintenance, CapEx improvement projects, knowledge-based continuous learning, and they should offer ways of how are we going to tackle structural problem solving. So additionally, and just to wrap up, I think it will be key for both cases, asset management and operation, invest in technology infrastructure to support remote work and that virtual collaboration between all parties.
Perfect. Thank you, Paula. Kevin, what's your thoughts about the role of asset manager and operations manager going forward?
I think a few things. One is that I think maybe I'm being a little bit contrarian here, but I actually think it'll reaffirm the need for people. I think, you know, our industry generally has run through this crisis quite well, and it's partly because we've been able to keep our people working and obviously designate them as critical employees. So I don't know that I necessarily agree with the premise that this is going to cause a major demanning exercise in our systems. I think we've already come down to relatively low levels of manpower across the fleet. I think where we may see improvements are things like connectivity. I mean, one of the big criticisms I have at our sites, in particular our large wind farms, you know, we have wind farms that are 300-400 megawatts, and, you know, actually being able to connect across those is very difficult. So if we're going to be relying on technology for communication and even for things like training and for work instructions, then we need to have much better connectivity across our sites and really being able to keep people plugged into some kind of virtual cloud where they can communicate and share things much more efficiently.
Yeah.
So those are probably the main things. And we've talked about risk management before. I think that's key, about really preparing the business for things that we know are out there, but we don't really want to think about. And two of the big ones are obviously the pandemic itself, but also the cybersecurity and making sure that our systems are resilient.
Right. Thank you, Kevin. Adela, how about yourself?
So I think there are two elements in my mind about this. One is that I'm hoping that the current circumstances are showing to the part of the business that are more focused, or the industry are more focused to development, quickly build and flip, that actually there is a lot of value proposition in operating and have long-term ownership of these sites. And I'm going to try to push what Kevin was saying in terms of, I agree with him that people are important, and this situation is showing that, you know, we need to maintain a good level of staff and workforce to be able to meet this type of situations, but also that these people need to be valued enough. We have seen races to the bottom like there's no tomorrow in the European market on both asset management and O&M services, let alone whether asset management is an in-house function or a service provider. And that, I'm hoping, would show the importance of these two functions, that are not simply passing through paperwork or going and opening an inverter every now and then, but they are actually allowing the site to deliver their potential. So it is quite critical, and I am not very sure that part of the industry has necessarily appreciated that much so far. So it's a true value-add proposition for me, and I'm hoping that will really sound with the rest of the organization. And the industry as a whole, to be fair. Investors, whether lenders or funders or pension funds or private equity funds investing into this type of technology and plans probably will appreciate this more. And that ultimately refocus on our people. I think what in an organization where safety is already one of the key values of the organization, like Lightsource BP, what we are shifting towards is that even people that are simply based in their office and don't face a huge amount of risk to get to the office, I mean, not compared to a service field engineer who opens an HV environment every now and then, is caring and ultimately rebalancing the type of lifestyle and commitment and productivity that our staff is giving us. And I think that would be the more human corner of what we are going through right now.
Thank you, Adela. We're running a little short on time, Mark, so I'm going to pass you the first audience question. So Mark, given the extraordinary challenges the virus has provided, have you and your colleagues collaborated with your competitors, considered joining and sharing data with trade organizations to ensure rapid mobilization of solutions?
I wouldn't say we've done it at scale. I think there's been some cases where, and it's more through pre-existing relationships or trade organizations where we would do that. We've already been trying to standardize scopes of work across the competitive landscape so that buyers of the service have a clear understanding of what they're buying. There's always been a push and pull between price and scope, and so nailing down scope I think has always been really important. And so the safety related elements of the scope of work are always a big part of the scope and come into the discussion a lot. So I think now that we have this new element, a new ingredient to introduce into the mix, we got to make sure that it's consistent across the industry and people understand there's consistent rules of engagement when it comes to COVID and the safety elements around that. It can create it could create cost differences. So I think it's important that we get standardization around what we're doing there.
Okay, excellent. I'm going to throw this next audience question out to the whole panel. So if you'd like to respond, just raise your pen or speak up. How can automation be used to automate the role of operational analysts and enhance trading operations? What about automation in the O&M and asset management function? Who'd like to speak on automation and the role going forward?
Well, just just to be the first one to answer the question, I think automation is already being seen, for instance, in the field in the form of solar inspections or using drones or unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs. But it's not only about what automated items we have in hand to do this task. It's about what we're going to do with the data. I think the key importance here is how we're going to use that technology to then extract the data and what to do with that. So I think we are going to see a bigger penetration in the market of this type of elements about drones and using them to improve the efficiency of our sites. But it's also very important to know how the treatment of that data is being done and how we're going to use that for our lessons learned and to make decisions, for instance, in future CapEx investments in our projects.
Excellent. Adela, please.
I think from my perspective is we already have a lot of data points. And the point is, how do we put them together to be able to have a proper risk assessment and to be able to make an informed decision? Now, when we talk about data, we all tend to think about the data that is coming from SCADA or the data that is coming from a drone inspection that already can be into different platforms and you have to put them together. But ultimately, these power plants are businesses. They have a P&L, they need to meet their profitability criteria. So there is an entire different set of data, which is their financial data, the expectation we have on the market price, as in electricity price, the Wall Street trade markets. And all of this data needs to come together. So it's not only the source and how automatically we get that data to our source, but it's also about what is the platform and the technology that allows us to pull it all together, despite the different disciplines that this data are in a package that would allow an executive to take a decision. And there is quite a lot we can do. There is quite a lot that is already available, to be fair. Whether we have been investing in that enough so far, it's a different question as an industry that we need to think to hold the mirror in front of our face and start having a conversation with ourselves about it and how quickly we will deploy in the next few months.
Yeah, thank you, Adela. Okay, one last audience question. I'm going to throw a softball up for Mark McClanahan. Mark, to you. The present pandemic has put a huge cost on O&M companies, where we have been asked by customers to nullify the annual escalation on the contract prices as per the contract. Rather than ask for a further discount in the O&M prices, how do you make this sustainable? You have 30 seconds, Mark.
Well, it may not be sustainable. I think, Adela, you used the word race to the bottom. We have to be careful with that. Obviously, ebbs and flows. My answer to that question would be, look, the cost of O&M is number of hours times rate, right? Rate is generally going up. Most people I know want to get an hourly bump in their wage every year, and that's been true since the dawn of time. So you got to cut hours, in my opinion. Trying to cut hours out of the mix is one of the most important things. You can do that through the automation that we talked about. You can design them out by picking different equipment. There's always cost pressure there, but I think it's a combination of design out the hours for service, simplify your supply chain for the equipment that you're bringing on the site, really think through long-term the amount of hours it's going to take to operate those plants, both in the office and in the field, and then that'll help you solve your rate question. And then to the extent you can divide the hours and send, this group of hours is going to be lower cost, this group of hours is going to my engineer, it's going to be higher cost. At scale, you can start to do that more simply, and that's another way to bring down your average wage rate as well.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Good response. Okay, we're coming to the end here. We're only going to have a few moments, and I'd like to ask you a question that really speaks to the exciting future, I believe, of the renewable power industry. So let me just throw this out to a couple because of time. I'll start with Adela. Adela, Gerard Reed of Alexa Capital said recently, we will build the 21st century power system around low-cost solar, not oil. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Why? Why not? Muted. Adela, I can't hear you. Uh-oh. Anybody hear Adela? Okay, let me pass that to Kevin while Adela gets going. Kevin, can you respond?
Yeah, I would open it up a little bit more and say it's not just low-cost solar. I think it's low-cost forms of renewable energy, whatever they may be. Obviously, I'm interested in solar, but I'm also interested in wind and other things as well. So I do think there's a unique opportunity right now to kind of set our path even more clearly on this new direction. And as I said, the COVID crisis presents either an opportunity to retrench or to move forward more quickly. And my hope is we'll go more quickly.
Adela, can we hear you now again? Try one more time. Yeah, not getting you. Apologies. I'm looking at the clock here. I think I'm going to need to wrap up. Right. So let me just speak a few moments here, and then we're going to wrap up and turn it back to Reese. And I'm going to leave up the slide of my colleagues, the panelists, so you can, excuse me, you can contact them if you'd like. So first of all, I just want to thank our panelists for the insights they shared today on how to navigate this very difficult, uncharted waters of COVID-19 and coming out of it. I think it's these are unprecedented times. We keep hearing that word, but it's true. You know, we really are talking here about resiliency, how elegantly, how quickly, how well we respond to major disruptive events. People come first. I think we've really demonstrated that today. So thank you, panelists, for focusing on your teams, on your people. But the new normal speaks for needs for great changes and operational resiliency. I like the idea. I've heard about sharing of data, of cooperation amongst all the stakeholders. So thank you so much for attending today. If your question was not answered, we will follow up with the panelists personally. Thank you for being a part of this. Thank you for taking the time. And I'm going to turn it back over to Reese.
Thanks so much, Steve, and yeah, thanks a lot for moderating the discussion. And yeah, so really great, and some really good insights as well from the panelists. So thanks Paula, Kevin, Adele, and Mark as well for joining. And yeah, in terms of the answer questions, like Steve said, we'll distribute them to Steve to go through with the team. And when we send out the recordings next week, we'll include that in there along with some more information about the speakers in case you're looking to get in touch or you have any questions to put over directly. But yeah, thanks so much, guys, for attending today. And yeah, just look out for our emails with the recordings, and that we've got some more webinars coming up across the summer months. So look out across different renewable tech. In offshore is our next one coming up. So just check into our website for the schedule. But thanks a lot again, guys, and thanks to the panelists and Steve and the team at Power Factors as well for partnering with us for this webinar.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Thank you.